Right. Okay. Welcome, everybody. We're here for the special session, May 23rd, 2023, Clear Creek County Board of County Commissioners. The first thing we have is public comment. No public comment online?
Nope.
None in the room. And I think there's a couple things real quick we should resolve. Peter was talking about having an executive session, whether we wanted to have it first or afterwards. Amy said she's good till 11 o'clock today. I'm good with either way. We can either do an executive session after the romp session or before. And then I've got one little 5-minute thing about that ecological studies grant that kind of connects to the romp. And we can talk about that afterwards too, at the end of our discussion.
I was talking to Peter this morning, and I thought that might be wise.
To go first with the exec? Or?
Yeah, just to get it out of the way, so
That's fine with me.
spend the time that we want to.
Okay.
Amy, when you say that's okay with your schedule, are you including any other people's schedules?
I have not confirmed that with Julie or Jonathan. I don't know what their schedules are, the folks from here.
Are Julie and Jonathan online right now?
Jonathan is, one of the Jonathans is, but not Juliet.
Okay. I think it's a pretty important executive session. If you guys want to, we can go ahead and into it right now. Okay, we'll now move into executive session for the following purpose.
Pursuant to CRS 2464-024B, for the county attorney to meet with the Board of County Commissioners for the purpose of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions concerning potential claims arising from the death of CJ Glass, and pursuant to CRS 2464-024B and E, for the county attorney to meet with the Board of County Commissioners for the purposes of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions pertaining to county dispatch communication services and determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators with regard to county dispatch communication services.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We'll now move into executive session. No written minutes will be kept. No decisions will be made. Mine isn't in here, but we have concluded our executive session. No written minutes were kept and no decisions were made. And we're just waiting on Brian here, but I think the way we're going to do the romp thing today is I can hold my piece till the end, which is just about that grant stuff on ecological resources and some developments there that have just popped up, making good progress. But I think following the romp with that would be good, the romp update. So, and I think Amy's intent is to give us a very brief refresher and kind of bring us back to where we were in the conversation. And Sean missed that anyway, so I think that's good for him because he missed the meeting. So,
Right. Okay.
So-
Ready? Okay.
take her away.
I'm just gonna move my my chair here. It'll take me a second. Sorry, I should have indicated. Wasn't sure what order things were happening in. Hey Megan, could you just plug me in? Thank you. Tangly. Thank you. So I wasn't planning on reviewing that presentation today, but just saying, just a reminder that last session, when we talked about this, I walked through a summary of the last 3 planning partners team conversations on a variety of topics. The planning partners team has been talking about several project priorities. Priorities is really a better way to describe it than projects. And those conversations were summarized by the consultant team and summarized into a more detailed presentation deck that came in the packet and a more compacted presentation deck that I reviewed in our session last week. And so I walked through that presentation last session and that walked through the topics that the planning partners team reviewed and the format of those conversations. And then we ran out of time, and this session is to basically review any questions that you had about those sessions, and really to allow you then to have the conversation that if we had more time, maybe would have immediately followed it. And in the interest of time and not having to just kind of repeat that whole presentation, my proposal is we would just move right to whatever questions you might have about the presentation from last session.
Because Sean wasn't here, I don't know how thoroughly you've reviewed the presentation document that Amy sent last night or the one she sent us last week. There was the one that was in last week's packet.
Right.
Then there was the one that you sent us that was a summary, a shortened version of that you sent us before the meeting, the day
Right.
before the meeting, I believe.
Right.
And then today's packet is a little different yet. It looks
It's the same.
the same as the one that would,
Both presentation decks are in your packet today.
right, the longer one and the shorter
Or
one.
one is
That's what-
shorter one.
So the one we're looking at the top, the shorter deck is identical to the one that you used in the last meeting that you sent us the day before the meeting, correct?
I believe it is identical. Yes.
All right. And
I don't think we need to rehash anything on my account. I looked at it, and if I have any questions
Okay.
that I feel like I'm the only one who needs the answers, I'll just reach out to you, Amy, directly.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask, which one did you look at? The one she emailed or the one that was in the packet?
The shorter one.
Okay. Comments, questions?
I think I have 2 overarching comments. And I went through the presentation and have some smaller comments that I think I can just deliver to staff. I don't even know if they're not super important, but just like, the draft vision statement, I think the protection and improving integrity of natural and cultural resources could be inverted with the previous clause. Kind of the same thing with the draft goals. I think that the 4 goals at the bottom could be inverted because there is kind of an implication of priority. And so I think the four at the bottom could be inverted with the 4 at the top, just to, but those are all sort of marginal things.
Right.
The 2 overarching comments I have is that, first, something that I think is really crucial to this process that has been communicated that there's not bandwidth within the scope of the work to execute, and that it would require a separate academic study, et cetera, is trying to make a determination about which types of use we want to emphasize and which types of use we want to discourage is something that I think at this point in the process, it's incumbent on this board to issue some direction on in a pretty formal way. And I think, Brian likes to say this, and I think he's right. This board's role is making decisions where, there's not clear-cut answers or where we don't have the time or the ability to arrive at, expert opinion on. And we have to roll with what we think we know. And I think we know a lot. I think we know enough that we can make that determination and issue that direction. And what I'm suggesting is that we go through the process and maybe we do this in a work session on our next public meeting so that we're not holding up this process to develop a rubric or a decision matrix that looks something like, for every use type, we score the relative economic impact, the relative ecological impact, the relative quality of life impact, the resource demand to manage the use, and use that all to make 2 determinations. One is this a use we want to encourage or discourage? And what's its management priority? Knowing that every type of use we have the goal to manage, right? It's not like some uses we're just going to ignore. But that's I think an important step for this board to take so that this process can, result in, have the outcomes that we're looking for, and focus on the things we wanted to focus on. And I'm gonna just sort of finish this request with, a specific observation, and this was in the longer presentation, Sean, so you may not have seen it. But when it discusses OHVs, it suggests that the use of formal parking lots could allow for that use to increase. And I'm not of the opinion that increasing motorized recreation use, in specifically the use of motorized recreation that's not street legal, like the difference between Jeeps and side-by-sides, is something that I don't think should be in this plan. I don't think it should be a talking point in this plan, except for where strategies and decisions we make may increase the use, which I think should be counter to the goals of this process. And so I think if we were able to provide that direction in a clear and formal way, it would make it easier for you, Amy, to communicate that direction within these groups and say, I just heard you say that the use of formal parking lots could increase use. And I want to point out that the board has issued clear direction that our goal is not to increase the use of OHVs, as one example, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a process I think that the board should undertake.
I have
What
a
do you
couple
guys think
comments.
about that?
My first comment is we're never on the leading edge of anything because we're a small county and that's fine. So I wonder, your points are all well taken, but I wonder rather than having to invent something out of whole cloth, if there might be communities in California or other places who are ahead of us that we could model or copy. And that the second part is whatever we do, in my opinion, has to be steeped in evidence and data,
Yes.
right? So rather than saying, and I intuitively am less favorable towards OHVs and dirt bikes than I am toward hikers, but I don't really have any evidence to back that up yet.
I think that's the work that this board can do is have a conversation in the open that's robust about, you know, what we know. And if we think we know enough, then we can make a determination. If we don't, maybe the end of the work session is we can't because we don't know enough. I personally, I think I do. And I think we can bring that information and have a conversation that's compelling about it.
I think there are kinds of information that we can show, sometimes there's a lot of stuff there's not really good data on. And then there's other stuff that is also kind of like almost common knowledge, like people are seeing it. And when you mention collaborating with other people and learning what they've done and modeling, and we're in a collaboration right now at NOCO with 4 other counties in the same region we're in that are addressing this very problem. And so to kind of look and see what those places are doing could be helpful also. It might be a lot more helpful than looking at California as an example and look at closer to home, somebody who we're already collaborating with, who's in our region, who's on the east slope of the Rockies surrounding Denver. So we have a good opportunity there for that. Brian, I saw you hold your finger up a minute ago. It looked like you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I want to go back to the bullet that George is referencing, because I think there's 2 different ways that bullet can be read and interpreted. And I want to make sure that we're interpreting it the way it was intended to be when it was written in that document.
Yeah. So just the feedback I got from the folks who were in the room when the planning partners team was making comments, and this is what just a reminder, the material in this PowerPoint is a recounting of the conversations that the planning partners team had about these topics. And what the planning partners team were observing about that particular topic was the potential as a caution that formalizing parking or formalizing OHV use could have an outcome of increased use as a caution, not a goal.
So it's an observation.
It was an observation, and in that longer PowerPoint, the presentation was divided into one slide that really focused on just sort of a broad recounting of what the planning partners team observed about a particular topic, and then after some more analysis, what sort of strategies they landed on as they processed the conversation a little bit more. And I don't think I don't think any of the folks who participated in those conversations or the consultants would feel that there was anything close to broad agreement. There was nothing close to a broad agreement about the OHV topic in general in these conversations, and there was certainly not a goal to increase OHV use in our community. So I think that there was a little bit of a that there could be, that sentence could be interpreted 2 ways for sure, but the intent of the conversation is to note that if we do endeavor to try to formalize OHV parking as one example of a recreation management action that might happen, the caution would be, well, that may increase use, so be aware.
Okay. Is that it?
Yes, that's it.
Just thank you for that clarification. I did misread that. And I want to be very clear. I'm not suggesting that the construction of parking lots to better manage OHV use is a negative. You know, it's kind of in the details there, right? A lot of rebuilding. And I want to point out in the next slide in the longer presentation, there's a OHV strategy about evaluating potential trailhead connections. I do view that as a strategy to increase use. It's often referenced as a strategy to increase use by the proponents of that activity because they want longer loops. And so that's something that I think, you know, is the other thing that I saw in here that indicated to me that maybe the board hasn't been clear enough about its goals around OHV use.
Yes.
Okay.
One thing I saw too that kind of reinforces my point about evidence and data, something that we're all concerned about is being used to create fears in all kinds of contexts, and that's wildfire. People talk about wildfire risk with short-term rentals. They talk about it with the proposed bike park in Conifer. We're talking about it here with OHVs. And what I think is interesting is, and I'm not suggesting my knowledge is perfect, but I can't think of one fire that was created by any of those uses. So it's sort of this potential boogeyman that is being thrown out there without much evidence.
I think there are, and I don't think we have any locally. I think you're right, Sean. For example, OHV's setting off, a spark arrestor failing or something happening, a catalytic converter, any kind of a little thing that's on any of the more exotic ones that could, I don't think any of them actually have converters, but that can create a fire because of the heat of the equipment itself or because of the spark that's emitted. But I think there is documentation of it happening in other places. What we do know is that 75% of the fires in the woods are human caused.
Lightning. Almost all of them are lightning.
That's not the data the U.S. Forest Service told me. And we had fire people from the U.S. Forest Service speaking to us at NOCO, and they said they definitely told us that 75% of their fires are human caused by one form or another.
We should look that up.
Well, I'm just going by what the experts that we brought in the room from the Forest Service to talk to us about it told us. I mean, we can all go Google it and have a debate here over how many it is. The point is that humans in the woods cause fires. That's a fact. We know that some of the biggest fires we've had have been campfires that have gotten away from people that were camped. We know that the one on Montaigne Park was a person shooting in a propane can. We know those things happen. And we know people that are going into the woods. That's why it's more like a total visitation amount, which is where we're increasing use of almost all parts. I've managed to get a reputation for being anti-OHV when I'm not suggesting or even imagining that we could make them completely illegal, that's something that we should aspire to. But in terms of increasing their use, we're right now seeing nature being, our natural resources being pummeled by everything from hikers on our most common hiking trails. And we talk about fixing like that by spreading them out and getting to go to all the mountains everywhere. At the same time, we're hearing from CPW that they're seeing wildlife loss in certain areas that had not had visitation up till now. But now they're starting to see wildlife pushed out of areas because of more people going into it. So when we spread the peanut butter, there's nowhere that wildlife has refuge. So there's a lot of things that come into it. And we know CPW specifically, who has encouraged an increase in OHV usage in Clear Creek County, not because they really, I believe, think it's good for wildlife and for the environment here, but because they need to put people somewhere for that demand. And they sell a lot of licenses and permits for them. And the other 4 counties in the NOCO region are not receptive to any expansion or trying to increase it at all. I know the answer to that trick question where I suggested we get with the other 4 counties a while ago, because I know what the answer is when we do that. And we see what the larger, better resourced counties with departments of natural resources are telling us. And there's impacts from mountain biking, which is the same kind of thing. Additional trails, additional trail fragmentation, whether hiking, biking, OHV or whatever. The motorized recreation has a tendency because it doesn't go, like when you're on foot and in some cases going and cutting a new trail on a mountain bike as a team, building downhill and cross trails and stuff like that. mostly motorized recreation doesn't just plunge into the woods away from any other roads. It's pretty difficult to do that. So what you see is an expansion of what's already there, a cut between two roads, going up this gully to see, and cutting the switchback and doing things like that and expanding. And then we lose our ranger and the ranger goes away and we get a new ranger and he comes in and what he sees is this is the new normal. This is what this place looks like when he gets here. So he doesn't see the change over time because we have a loss of institutional knowledge. So in any case, there are a lot of impacts from this. And I think that we should be data driven. And I think there's two areas. My overarching comments are probably two also. One is that I think we have created an inertia by our choice of how we've engaged and who we've engaged through this process, limited primarily by its scope and the funding and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we have a survey. It's a social media survey. It offers some value, but it's certainly not a scientific sampling by any stretch of the imagination. And it doesn't take into account, some of the bellwethers of impacts as well as it could have. And I don't really fault the team so much because with a grant this size, it's pretty hard to do a whole lot of scientific work when you're trying to create a recreation plan and a plan for management of the outdoors and nature. A few things that I saw that were kind of left out, something that has caused a fire that, because I got the call on it from Incident Command when it happened, was shooting. It's still part of the recreation conversation in this county. Dispersed recreational shooting is still a thing. After both of the shooting ranges are complete and we get our closures, most of the area is still going to be open to shooting. And so we just need to be aware of that that's currently, I didn't see shooting addressed anywhere in here. I do think that the OHV and rafting to have received special attention, I found curious because we've also heard from a local U.S. Forest Ranger who's leaving now, Scott Hawes, that he has an issue with the impact of mountain bikes, not with OHVs. That's his own personal slant. And I think that has to do with when he came and when he left and what he saw in between, what he was able to understand and know. We have heard plenty of complaints about the impacts of hikers on the mountains around us, and the 14ers Initiative has been here to talk to us about that. And so we do have a lot of conflicting information. And the only reason I bring this up is I'm not quite sure why we would single out this one unless we are actually trying to prioritize OHV development. Because we're trying to solve the problems through accommodation, like parking lots and stuff like that. A parking lot can help as long as you're very strict and rigid about what you're trying to do with that parking lot. If you don't want to increase use in the area and you see a de facto amount of illegal parking going on and you want to build a parking lot so those people can park there, then build a parking lot that's the size that you think you can tolerate. And if that's the amount of de facto parking that's going on there now, or half that amount, if you think it's too much, you build a parking lot that size and you get cooperation from the sheriff to write tickets to everybody else that parks there and just have a zero tolerance policy. That's pretty hard to do with the law enforcement budget that we've got, but that threat has to be out there. It's got to be signed, no parking.
Are we going to have
a
a presentation at some point?
I don't think so. Did you want me to stop talking, Sean?
Well, I don't understand where this is going. I mean,
I just sat here and listened to two people talk until they were done.
Are you asking about a presentation in this session?
I'm confused as to why we're here. I guess I thought we were seeing a presentation or hearing something.
Let me take
from you.
that. So Amy gave her presentation during the last meeting and we just did not have enough time to cover all of the comments and the questions from the three of you.
We had no comments and questions.
Right.
So we didn't do any. This is my first opportunity. This is the first time I've spoken since we opened the meeting last time on this.
I'm just having trouble following where you were headed.
I'm sorry.
And where we were
I'm
going.
sorry. I was painting an overall picture. I shouldn't have done that. And I promised you guys I wouldn't do that I'd be more specific. And I do have a list here.
Okay.
But there's a lot of stuff bubbling through my head because of the number of meetings. By this time, probably thousands of hours of meetings over the last few years on this subject at NOCO and here. And some of the things I've been kind of concerned with. My two overarching things are that I think that we don't have data. We have zero data on what the real natural ecological impact is. And I want to address that later on with an opportunity we have. And we really have zero data other than wild guesses on the economics. What we're getting is opinions from people about whether something is good for the economy or bad for the economy. And it's very predictable who you're getting the responses from. It's just like when people wanted to bring gambling to Idaho Springs, the people that were for gambling were going to make a lot of money off of it. The people that were against it weren't going to make a lot of money off of it. And it was that clear cut in our community. Here, what you're hearing is people think that we should embrace this, and it's good for the community, especially if it's something that they either are a really strong advocate and love to do themselves, or if they intend to make some money off of it. And then they come to meetings and they make sure they're included in the process. So we get outfitters, we get people to come tell us the good things about it. We have no economic data to tell us what the real impact is, the overall holistic management cost of doing that is. We have virtually no ecological data to tell us whether this area or that area has sensitive ecology in it or not. It's not really addressed here. And I think that's largely because we don't have the scope. I think that lack of data is the one overarching piece. The second piece is that I think our outreach, which I mentioned, has not reached as effectively as it should and could have a number of the people. If I look at the outline, the progress to date, and the outline of how we proceed forward from here, we had a survey, we've had a meeting with the CAP. At the CAP, we were able to have some people from places like Solve and Friends of Clear Creek, and a couple of those. But beyond that, we've had multiple meetings with people who are either the experts in the field because they're involved in the business, or they are the administrators of the communities, the towns and stuff like that. And without having the bellwethers of that impact, who are the people that actually live in that area. And other than looking, you could clearly see what their view was. If you look, when I looked at the surveys of who lives near the areas of use, about whether they thought there was a need for more, for example, expansion, the people that live near it clearly had by far the lowest percentage of people who thought we needed to add new stuff. Many of them thought we did need to maintain what was there. Another criticism I have of constructive criticism, if it can still be constructive, is that when you look at the choices between, do you want to expand with new amenities? Do you want to improve existing amenities? Do you want to focus on conservation? All of the above, none of the above. Well, a thinking person is going to know that no one of those three by itself is going to be adequate. And so you can't just pick one. So then you're left with either none of the above or all of the above. And if you believe that two of them are important things to do and the third one's not, you're going to say, well, all of the above, I guess, because that comes the closest to being what I think. So there was no opportunity so when I looked at the data to see for the conclusions that were drawn from the data, that there's a plurality of people that suggest all of the above, which suggests let's go for it. I think they're kind of left with the least of the evils when they pick the solutions. And that was my thought when I looked at that, was I don't think that the conclusion is based on, as George put, I think previously when I heard him say, last week, I think he did say one thing, which was that there was a question about whether we had, whether we had asked the questions in a manner which would give us objective answers. It would give us a full gamut of answers. And so there's that.
That was in the prior session a month or so ago.
Oh, was it? Okay. I'm just looking down through my list. Bear with me for a second. I think the limited use of the CAP to date and the social media survey are inadequate to have read those bellwethers well enough to know. And I notice as we move forward, what happens is staff's going to get together, and you're going to get together again multiple times with the planning partners group, have one more meeting with the CAP, as I saw, and then seek feedback, and then create the plan, and then lay it out and seek feedback from the BOCC and the public at that point in time. And I would suggest that in our CSS processes and transportation, one of the things they do is they try to make sure everybody's represented from the outset so that you don't create it. And I've talked about this multiple times, intellectual inertia. Once you take a direction, start going that way, it's really hard to turn that around and want to come back and undo it. And so when you wait to get your feedback from the public, for the most part, if your most germane feedback comes after you've set this in front of us and said, here's the conclusions we've drawn from all this work we did, here's what we think, what do you think? They have very little ability to impact that going forward. And I would note that from our meeting, our very first meeting on this subject, where we kind of, when George and I were here and Sean couldn't be here, and we really laid out some strong objections afterwards. I see in the outline here that what we did was we incorporated the BOCC's thoughts and feedback into our work going forward, and I don't really see evidence of that. And if it is, I'd like somebody to point it out to me, because what I'd asked for, I know clearly, was I'm not asking that we pick on these guys, we kick this out, let me draw the report, anything like that. Can we just make sure that those people are robustly involved from the neighborhoods? And I don't think they've, other than by insertion, had that robust involvement. I know I heard that at the OHV breakout session that there were some people that weren't supposed to be there. And personally, I'm glad they were, because at least they were able to give some counterpoints to the people that were there that suggested that an expansion of OHV use would be a good thing, and that's what they were promoting, because they were invited to be there. And so that's one. So those are just some things that I've said several times before, having the engagement of those people that can, I think, better inform what will positively impact our community, both economically and socially, as well as what will have a better impact on the environment, would be good. Toward that end, I think that what this is a first step, and I don't think it's a failure at all. But I think it's got to be acknowledged that it's a first step and a revealing of what we don't know, to be able to make decisions about anything like this this report, until we have the ecological data, and until we've had a more robust conversation with the people who live right at the point of impact, especially. Sorry.
I want to respond to, there's a number of things to respond to, but the first thing is I do see evidence that this process has evolved based on our feedback. Has it evolved enough? I see evidence that it hasn't. But has not.
Okay.
But I do just want to sort of, I don't know, like, what am I trying to say here? I want to qualify that statement of yours, because I know that when, like, we've had a number of sessions on this, and every time we've delivered feedback, we've seen changes. The fact that we're still talking about connecting trailheads for OHV use is an indicator that it hasn't done enough. But, and I also heard you say, at other periods when you were talking, that, staff has been trying to be responsive, and so I just think that particular comment, I don't want to leave on the record without a response.
Okay, that's fair enough. And let me just say that I think the passion of my delivery causes me to really especially bring that impression. And I did make that hard statement. And I thought about it as I said it, that there's some change, but it's felt like it was, the main things that I saw were the exact same stuff, continuing focus on OHVs and trying to do something to get it organized. And the knowledge that I have of what's taken place in the meetings, where there were people who were there that were invited to promote OHV and expansion of OHV use, where others, there's very little opportunity for other people to even know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so there's that. And then the second one is that going forward, I see it's the same people getting together and then giving a product out to the public to see what they think afterwards. And I think that there has got to be, before this, I think it's not useful as a tool to expand and grow and develop. It may inform us in some places about what we can do to better manage and control something, But before we start talking about expanding and growing and developing, we need to prove holistic economic benefit, meaning what is the positive to the county, both privately and publicly, and then what is the cost to the county, both county resources managing it, and what are we causing to happen on other public lands that we don't manage because of those decisions. And so I think more public involvement would be good. And I agree that I did see some glimmers of hope in there, where there was some stuff about, there's certainly some talk of it. There's more talk about And I think there's talk about natural resource conservation and protection without any real specifics. It's like, and we must always do this while, now here's our projects and here's what we want to do. So I would suggest the addition of one project that I'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah, and I want to just offer a little context also on the planning partners team conversations, because, so we have the planning partners team participant list was in large part modeled off of some of the participant lists that really came from those original table members that were from that table group is the best way I can describe it right now, that you had talked about years ago in terms of who was needed to be in those ongoing discussions. And that sort of stakeholder subject matter expert type group is who we wanted to be participating as the planning partners team. Now, did every person we invited show up to every meeting? No. But that's something that we will be keeping in mind as we look at what came out of those conversations. The input that those people gave is input. It is not the content of the final document. Your input is not in yet, right? So this PowerPoint and the material in it is a report on what happened in those conversations. It is not a conclusion. It is not the end of the conversation, right? It is an accurate story of the conversations to date, which we want you to understand and see and read. It does not include your perspectives, and that is a missing piece. That is why we are having this conversation, to add your perspectives into the conversation. And that can only be done in stops and starts because of the nature of how this works, right? We have conversations with these subject matter experts and community members, and then we say, hey, here's what the community has told us, here's what our subject matter experts has told us. And you guys say, what do here's what we know that you have told us. And then we go through the process of weaving it all together. And that's what this step is right now. And so what I'm hearing you say is you're still not seeing enough public input into this process.
That's the primary thing.
And so that's important. And I think it makes perfect sense that you are seeing that this material does not feel like a full report or like it's baked, because it hasn't actually gotten into the oven yet, right? Like, it's not baked. It's the ingredients are kind of still on the counter, and we're saying, hey, here's what we've got so far, and we'd love to hear more. We'd love to hear from you about how it's going. What do you think? Does this look like this cake's going to taste okay? Is it going to need more frosting?
And I think
What do you think?
one of the things I said before is, I don't think the silent majority has been heard, right? I mean, I think the survey that we got was from the kind of the true believers, right? The people who are interested and probably more opinionated than their neighbors. And I wrote a couple of notes, which I'll fire off here really quickly. And just in general, I feel like I don't even know what I don't know. And like, even when I heard your comment, George, about connecting the trailheads, I mean, maybe that attracts OHV, more experienced OHV users who are more responsible. Like, I just don't know, right? I mean, it seems, I think we're relying too much on our intuition and kind of trying to connect common sense dots. And when I mentioned California, I'm not saying that we shouldn't use NOCO and talk to our neighbors.
Right.
I mean, I feel like we need to cast a really wide net, because just Googling around, I don't really see a lot of other people having done what we've done. And I don't want to be making the first timer mistakes and having people point to us as a way of not to do this, in 2 years when we've done whatever we're going to do. So, I mean, I'm not saying this to throw cold water on what you guys are doing or what we're doing. It's just, again, I like the idea of just making sure that we're really aware of what's going on out there and people who are ahead of us, because I'm convinced that there are those people, whether they're in California or Utah or who knows where, right? Probably more well-financed communities that are have had population. I mean, our population pressure is relatively recent, right? It's in the last 25 years, and there are plenty of other communities who have been dealing with this for 40 or 50 years.
One of the things we have available to us right now is the other counties I mentioned, other than Gilpin, the three other counties are Jeffco, Boulder, and Larimer. Larimer has a full Department of Natural Resources that devotes itself to this stuff. It's public land management, not just recreation management, full-time. They've got a large full-time department that works on it in Larimer. Boulder's done the same thing. They've got a Parks and Recreation department that rivals Denver's. Jeffco's the same. Their open space department is larger than this, about the size of this county in terms of budget. And so they have done an awful lot of work that we can draw from in some of these areas, and particularly Boulder, somewhat Jeffco, but particularly Boulder and Larimer have a lot of land that's very similar to our mountain land, and they've been trying to manage these same problems there. So whether it's about the OHV stuff that was brought up or anything else, I think they're all valid sources of that. And also, we've been looking at studies, and we had people come in from everywhere from the Pacific Northwest to back east from California to talk to us in those sessions, those core topic sessions. So there's a fair amount of knowledge that's begun to be drawn in there, but I think we should, I do agree with you that we should model that. Go ahead, George. I heard you take a breath.
Yeah. First, I just want to acknowledge, I hope you don't, and I see Julie's hand is up.
Yes, she has to go at 10, so, and she did have a thought on the topic, if you wanted to give her a moment.
Yeah, before Julie, I just want to, I heard that you're saying basically, I'm the messenger, don't punish the messenger.
Oh.
I want to hear your feedback. I acknowledge that. My intent is definitely not to punish the messenger.
Yeah.
Julie.
Hey, everybody. This has been a great conversation. And thanks for that. I do want to say, just offer a few thoughts on some of the specifics. I think on economics, the natural resources piece and the community kind of input piece, just to and also just kind of ditto Amy in terms of where we're at and welcoming feedback as we shape a plan here. On economics, I think we know that that's just a place where the expertise and research and data aren't there specific to Clear Creek County. There's, information out there about different use types and what they generate. But I think to really understand that for Clear Creek, we've known from the start, that's just a place that we may not have all the data. So I just want to acknowledge that. On natural resources and impacts, I just want to submit that I think, a couple of things that we've learned over time, ecological and natural resource impacts are localized. And so at the scale of the countywide planning, I think, that's part of the trade-off. We can look at the big picture maps, which we know some data are missing from. For example, the, sensitive species data, and I know we've had that conversation in NOCO. We can look at connectivity corridors and other layers, and we can look at that information, and then also look more specifically at trail-specific impacts as you get into more trail-specific planning. That is part of what is kind of projected as the kind of systems wide view of, where are you looking at impacts and how do you dig into that data? It's not something that was tackled in this process in terms of really dissecting those impacts, but I think that's one of the kind of potential priorities that's teed up. So I just want to flag that that was the first thing that the PPT spent a session on, was how would you bring sustainability and natural resources data and principles into doing a closer evaluation of trailhead impacts for all different use types and potential next steps. So I just want to kind of flag that piece of it. And then I want to submit humbly that I would actually say that I think you have enough community data input. And this is what I mean by that. Is it a statistical sample of, exactly what percentage of your county residents feel one way or another? No. But I think that you have a lot of qualitative input and values-based input that could lead you in a lot of directions, to George's earlier point. And that's something that happens inevitably with community engagement. On tough topics, you're going to hear a lot of different opinions. It's part of why in the community survey report, we included all of the answers to the magic wand question of what would you do differently? And there's 100 pages of that or something like that, or maybe not quite that many, like 30 pages. So there's just so many ideas out there. And in terms of guiding where this goes next, if you want to focus on what I think Sean was kind of expressing as a silent minority, I think you can focus on the feedback or silent majority, whatever it might be. But you can focus on the feedback of folks who are most concerned about, about recreation negatively impacting Clear Creek. You can focus on the feedback of those who are in areas that are, high use rec areas, and the intersection of the two, those in those areas who are saying they live in highly impacted areas and they're negatively impacted. And we have that data and it's broken down, and you can look at their qualitative responses of what they want and what they're concerned about. I don't, whether that sample size doubles or not or changes, I think you have the qualitative data. So if you want to focus on which pieces or which concerns or which segments of community you really want to, prioritize, I think it's actually there. And I just encourage you, rather than looking at pie charts and percentages, kind of focus in on the qualitative pieces of where people's concerns are. And I think George's point around like getting some feedback from you all then as to, which of those perspectives and issues to prioritize for the ROMP would be really helpful. But I don't think we're going to get there from statistics at this point. I think it's more the values-based trade-offs and what guidance you would give as community leaders. That's my humble submission of, what we have to work with and input we've got and how you could use it to kind of guide us in the next step on all of this. So.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for handling that so well, by the way, I would say, just on top of that. I think I kind of agree that when I talk about the value of the survey, it's not that I don't think it's large enough. It does seem like a decent sampling. There are a lot of graphs and a lot of questions asked. So I think sometimes we see what we want to see and we hear what we want to hear when people are talking, we filter it. And I looked at that data and I was drawing different conclusions from looking at those same charts than the ones that I saw down below in the conclusions and goals. So I think it depends on how you read the data sometimes. And so my suggestion about better public outreach is meaning in the meetings when people are there, having the opportunity for them to actually have an impact other than through that survey on the grant itself, and have a more robust and better representation. And I heard what you said about the tables that you modeled after, that you had seen that I'd done. There were a lot of people that were not involved. The reason I showed us a table like that where there were representatives of each community would mean that at that central planning table, all of those people had a voice representing them at that table as people of those particular interests. People like, from SOLVE, Friends of Clear Creek. I know that you've had open space involved in your teams, and so that's good, having an open space representative. So I think what I'm talking about is as we go forward, if there's a way, and I don't know if we have the funds or anything to do it, but if we can make sure that those voices are at the table as you develop your conclusions from that data, it would be helpful. That's really what I mean by a better public outreach going forward at the end of the day. And go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to somewhat double down on what you're saying, as well as what Amy said earlier. I think what Amy was describing, which I thought you did well, was it's more than just shooting the messenger, right? This is a process, and so you're getting a synopsis of meetings, and you're getting the input from the folks who are at those meetings, and there's some input on those lists that you don't agree with, which I think is okay, right? I mean, so there are some folks out there who believe that we should make better trail connections, whether that's a good example or a good idea or a bad idea. It's the input that they're getting in their meetings.
Okay, I understand that.
And so, again, it does not include you're not getting a master plan yet. It doesn't include your input your recommendations. All you're getting right now is a synopsis of what's happening. So you're aware of the process that's going on, so.
And I want you to know, I'm really not operating at a really shallow level where I'm reacting to the boogeyman that I see that I don't like. What I'm really saying is, I don't have any problem with people having that input. What I'm saying is that there are some people that aren't at the table to get a different input that counters that as effectively and robustly as it's been allowed to be offered. And that was my reasoning. Go ahead, George.
Thank you.
I did have something to finish, and I want to finish that after you talk, please.
Well, I just see that it's 10 o'clock. Julie, I just want to say, I acknowledge your points. I think they're well made. Thank you for making them.
Right. Fair enough. I forgot what I was going to say.
I think in particular, I agree with Julie.
When it comes
that-
back, I'll ask you to stop so I can say it. Thanks. It was,
In particular, I agree with Julie that increasing the sample size is not going to yield a lot more information.
I agree.
I think there's a lot of information in there. I agree with Randy that I have a different take on some of the conclusions that came out of that initial report. But I think that different take was communicated and incorporated. And, I mean, Sean, to your comment about the silent majority, certainly a majority of our constituents did not respond to that.
Vast majority.
I don't think that you can derive from that they're in agreement. I don't know if that's what you're trying to imply or not, but that vast.
You don't know what they
majority-
think is what I was trying to
Yeah.
apply.
We don't know what they think. One thing that we know is that they don't all have the same opinion, right? And so I wouldn't want to imply that when we say silent majority, that there's like a majority opinion that's silent.
Yeah, that's not what I was.
Okay.
that may not have already been represented, for example.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I really kind of want to try to draw this conversation into like, how do we provide feedback on this process as it moves forward? I think if there are members of our community that feel like they don't have good enough access to the policy conversations, whether the solution is incorporating them into the process in every meeting, or the solution is saying, okay, we're gonna have a meeting with you and we want to hear your feedback on all this. I leave that to you. But I would accept that feedback. It seems to me like whether they were invited or not, the fact that they were in the OHV meeting and that their feedback is reflected in this document is a win. So I think as far as the OHV topic, I know that I do view trailhead connections as a strategy to increase.
Right.
And I want to sort of see if the board can arrive at some agreement on that that's not a strategy we'd like the ROM to pursue. I know there's information, and so I'll stop there rather than making my argument. Is there agreement that that's a strategy that we should not pursue, potential trailhead connections?
I agree with it. I think it'd be better if we, knowing that it's 10 o'clock, we knew when we went into executive session that we were likely to run over on this. And so I'd like for us to take the time, if we have it here, to take a few minutes.
We have till 11.
What's that?
We have,
We were scheduled, this was scheduled till 10 on the agenda, I think.
It didn't have an end
30
time.
seconds.
yeah, we're fine. We have
Okay.
till 11, at least till 11.
I just want to add some context that underpins or is a foundation under what George is stating. There's a history to being asked this question before. The way you make trailhead connections for OHVs is to, on certain stretches of county roads, legalize OHVs so that people can come off of one loop, drive down county roads, get on another loop and go. And there are also lengths of miles that are necessary for different kinds of activities to have what's called a quality user day, to do a loop for that day. And when you get into OHV use, motorized use, it's much longer than it is for mountain biking, which is much longer than it is for hiking. And so the loops that we have here, the complaint that's been made, and the reason we've been asked to legalize OHV use on our county roads is twofold. So that people can park down away from the areas where they can get large parking areas, like around Empire at the ball field has been something that's been floated 2 or 3 times now. And then be able to drive up the county roads into the national forest through the neighborhoods and stuff. If you start to think about that, that can apply all over the county once you start opening that box. And it is absolutely a view towards expanding the opportunities for the industry in the area. And we've heard that from Coveco, and we've heard it from CPW wanting to sell tags and improve the rider experience so that it'll attract more people. And they've also told us that Clear Creek County is where they need to put those people near Denver because they can't put them in the other areas. And Sean and I begged to differ with them on that about 5 years ago, 6 years ago in this room when they told it to us. And
They said that was our
wasn't
niche.
necessarily our vision.
Motorized was our niche, was exactly what was said in this
Yeah,
room.
it said,
And I
you guys
was
aren't
here
hiking and
too as a
biking.
commissioner.
You were here, and motorized is not your niche. Mountain biking's not your niche. Your niche is dispersed recreational shooting and motorized recreation. That's what we want to do in Clear Creek County. And Sean and I said, we don't think that's a good idea. And so we know that's what drives that conversation. So and the answer for me is no, I'm not interested in making those trailhead connections because I've heard the argument brought, I've heard the arguments made, seen them made and listened to their logic. I've looked at the economic data that always comes from the Colorado Highway Vehicle Coalition or the national version thereof. Someone like that has data that says that you're all going to become rich if you let this happen here. And that's what you would expect to see that's why I mentioned the money earlier. The one other thing I'd like to say is that, and I'm going to draw one of these, what seems like far-ranging analogies that I threw out earlier. And it's to 1991 and the attempt to bring gambling to Idaho Springs. And what happened was some people held a meeting and they said, everyone interested in coming to this meeting to talk about this subject, come to the meeting and talk about it. And what they got was a room full of about 24 people in a room that were all interested in bringing gambling to Idaho Springs. And it turned out that 3/4 of the town was radically opposed to it. But that's what hit the newspapers, was that this town was trying to pull itself up by the bootstraps. And it took a half a year of demonstrations and all kind of stuff to get the press to actually believe that it wasn't a few radicals that opposed it, that it was virtually everyone that opposed it, and that there were a few people that were going to make money on it that were trying to make it happen. So when you hold meetings for recreation management and you invite people to come to talk about, we're saying we're going to have a session on OHVs, the likelihood is that you're going to get more people that are interested in OHVs than not showing up at the room unless people are really aware of what's likely to happen. And that's true whether we're talking for any of the other uses as well.
There's an important difference between what happened in Idaho Springs in 1991 and what's happening now is the makeup of the elected body, right?
Right.
In Idaho Springs in 1991, you had a majority of an elected body that was about to approve that. That's not the case right now. So, Sean, what do you think about, and I want to read this bullet fully for you.
That's actually not true, by the way. The majority of the elected body wasn't. There were people that were for it. The majority ended up voting to hold the election because we knew what the outcome would be. We'd already seen a survey.
Okay. So, the bullet reads, Sean, evaluate potential trailhead connections and identify places to park besides in and around Empire, for example. And that what's not stated, but would be necessary for this strategy to work, is legalizing the lengths of county roads between Empire's town borders and the national forest. And that's not something I'm interested in using county resources to evaluate because it's something that I don't want to do.
I don't feel like I'm sufficiently educated right now to weigh in on it one way or the other, honestly.
Okay.
And I can educate myself before our next conversation about it.
Do you feel like you're asking the board to not deliver that direction because of that? Because that's what I hear 2 board members saying they want the direction to be, that not be a strategy that's evaluated.
I guess I'm philosophically against not increasing our body of knowledge because we feel so biased against something that we feel like we understand what the outcome's going to be even before we have it.
That's a fair statement. And what I'll say to you is that this is a process with a limited scope, and we only get to choose to have so much knowledge, right? It's not possible to know everything.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is,
And-
I think, sorry to interrupt you, Empires and Idaho Springs and Georgetown's community input, I think, is important, because I think they will probably say something to the effect that, hell no. And I respect that. And if that's the case, then I would probably back down from my intellectual exercises.
This is a situation where Empire would like to see this. And if there's one area where we have very robust community feedback, it's the residents along those roads. It's also, we get feedback a lot from the owners of property up in the national forest about the condition of the roads due to this use. Right, so if there's anywhere we have robust feedback in the county on recreation, it's this specific bullet point.
I think I can understand what Sean says, because it's absolutely not a problem in the Evergreen area, because you don't have those places that are like OHV loops and stuff, to my knowledge. They're
There's none that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and so it's not something that you see. And you mentioned having enough knowledge to be able to make a decision. My knowledge is not just, like some reactionary freaking out because I don't like an idea that's stuck in my head that's a boogeyman I don't like. It's having been through the history and seen the arguments, watch people raise the economic data, and realizing that you can get economic data that says it's horrible, and you can get economic data that says it's good, and it all depends on who generates it. Having been on the road, having actually surveyed all the people on the road myself, and seeing that it was about out of 25 people, there was one person that was ambivalent, one that was for it, and 23 that were against it along the residents up and down the road. And then watching the mayor of Empire and a couple of town board members in the town of Empire promote it and say, this is what we need for the town because it'll bring economic development to the town, not realizing that once they started letting, I shouldn't personalize this so much, but once, and this goes way back, once they started letting people use the town parking to park their trucks and trailers and rigs and get out their OHVs and start sporting each other around and heading up into the woods, that we were going to become a staging area and a playground for OHVs, as well as everybody along those roads. So the whole town would now finally be feeling what some people right along those roads were feeling already. Because what happened was this board, not this current Board of County Commissioners, but a previous Board of County Commissioners voted on first reading to legalize it. The word got out to the OHV community that had been advocating for it. And on second reading, 2 weeks later, a bunch of citizens came in and convinced them that they'd made the wrong decision, so they overturned it. The word going out to the OHV community but having gone out, caused for the rest of that year and for the following spring, a bunch of people to come down and park their trailers down at the ballpark and start driving up those roads illegally, thinking it was legal. And so we got plenty of anecdotal data and plenty of opinions built based on what they felt along those roads. So I've had enough experience with it, personally seeing it, going through the public opposition and going through and listening to the arguments and looking at the economic data from both the proponents and the opponents to come to the conclusion. Everything I've done at NOCO for the last 5 years now has led me to the conclusion that I'm ready to say I'm not interested in legalizing any of our county roads for OHV use. Understanding that there's some de facto places where it's going on now anyway, because we don't have the enforcement to do anything about it.
So I think that it's unlikely that the way that this project and process is structured, that any specific policy recommendations are even likely to be an outcome of the ROMP. The type of outcomes in the report are management principles. I think that's the content, the type of language that would be in this report. So I don't think it's likely that we would be putting in some sort of policy language in specificity about an OHV policy. But I think we can reflect the sentiment of this conversation in a way that doesn't have to get at a granular level, but protects the strategic intent that I'm hearing in this conversation. Because I don't think it is actually out of line with the what was reflected at the PPT level. And I think there's a way to sort of, sticking with my cake metaphor, have our cake and eat it too here, like the conversation included a lot of desire for protection and preservation of the values of our community. And so I think that keeping all of that in mind, the identification of management principles that can be a guide for future policy discussions. I mean, I think that's, especially for the OHV topic, which I feel like is quite nascent because of it's a touchy topic, right? It's a difficult topic. It has a lot of strings attached to it. It's a difficult topic to engage. So we haven't gotten very far on it. It's a baby,
Right.
So we just need to get into the place where we can start to talk about some very basic principles where there's agreement and that's the level that I think we're going to get to at the ROMP. I don't want to leave without seeing what interest you may have. We don't have to leave the OHV topic right now, but I just want to also note that high use areas, the creek, there are other topics that you all may want to provide a little bit of time to as well. So, but there are other things where we may be a little bit more have a little bit more specificity based on sort of the maturity or the amount of agreement that there is on a topic that may have a more developed set of management principles. But this project is not going to have specific policy recommendations. I do not anticipate because of.
That's implied in those priorities, so.
When I read strategies to pursue, including that, I read that as a policy.
Well, again, this is a reflection of the planning partners team conversations, and that was how we elicited feedback from that particular team. And that is an accurate reflection of some of the strategies that team identified as maybe as a way to elicit their opinions. That is not what the fully baked strategy.
This is our opportunity to have
are.
feedback, and I'm talking about what I
Yes.
want to feedback.
Okay, perfect.
And so, Sean, I want Amy kind of made the point for me that I was getting ready to make as I try to persuade you that this is something that we should be very clear that we don't want to see evaluated. OHV use is one of 10 sub goals of this plan, right? Among those 10 sub goals are a number of what I feel are viable opportunities to get better economic output from our activity, better manage our activity, expand the use of activities whose use we think is on the net beneficial to us. And I want to highlight one in particular, which is evaluating subalpine winter recreation activities. And I think, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the questions I had was whether or not that includes Gwinnett La Pass. Because I think if we have an area where there's a match between evaluating the potential to increase use and a direct economic benefit, it's getting people up Gwinnett La Pass. We have two big parking lots up there right now that are built. They're ghost towns all winter long.
The road's closed.
No, right at the closure to the road, there are two big parking lots and there's a lot to do up there, and nobody's up there. And so, like, choosing where to dedicate our resources and choosing to say, we're going to take this issue that will drive BOCC conversations, drive community conversations, and take up a bunch of our bandwidth off the table so that they can focus on areas where we can say we're pretty sure we know that there's opportunity to be had in a way that's less controversial, I think is a win. Because we don't have, I don't think, the bandwidth to get all of the knowledge about every opportunity in all 10 of these, right? So is that a compelling argument to you? Because I really want to respect your desire, and I agree with it, to have knowledge, right? I mean, knowledge isn't bad. It's not like, oh, we don't ever want to know about that. It's just that, there's some other things that are more important for us to look into right now.
I guess I'm looking at it a little bit differently. And I have heard all the conversations in the past. I do think it's interesting, though, that there are stakeholders who are on the other side of the argument. And I view this as an opportunity to, in a evidence-oriented manner, actually go on record and saying, here's what we prefer and here's why. And it doesn't seem like it's going to require that much effort. So rather than saying, we don't even want to talk about it, it's like, well, why don't you want to talk about it, right? Do you have some conflict of interest? Is there some funny business going on that we don't know about? Like, are you in somebody's pocket? Like, why not just go through the exercise? Because it sounds like the evidence is out there, right? It shouldn't be that hard to quantify it and say the reason we don't want to open county roads is for this. And then we'll be done with it.
Right now, it's illegal around the state, except where counties have chosen to make it
Like
legal.
San Juan.
Huh?
Like San Juan County.
Yeah.
It's like Mad Max down there.
Some counties have done that with some areas. I know that we've heard out of Gunnison that Gunnison legalized some areas that they wish they hadn't, which brings up another issue, which is letting the genie out of the bottle. And once the genie's out, you got to respect the genie that you created by letting it out. And for example, if you do, I can give you an example. If you were to do that in the town of Empire or any of our towns, if you did it in Georgetown for Saxon Mountain, it could be the same thing. Once you build it, once you legalize it, once you make it okay to do that, and so that people can start doing it, and someone opens a business and starts a business, or a couple of outfitters start a business, and then you decide it was a failed pilot project, and now you decide to undo it and turn it back off. What do? You put two people out of business that formed businesses.
I think you're
because-
kind of making my point. Like, why not go on record? Why not say we don't want this?
I'm suggesting I have enough information to go on record now.
I think I do, and that's because I've been involved in it so long.
And that there's other places where we lack information and frankly kind of lack focus because this OHV conversation around Empire is grabbing so much bandwidth. But Amy, I'm really curious, I want to hear your opinion. I know you're sort of the messenger here, but I also know you've attended all the NOCO stuff. You have been in all these meetings. Do you think the conversation around trailhead connections around Empire is knowing all the context in this conversation that we've had is a good use of the limited time we have for this?
And I have a more focused version of that, which is how much extra time would it take to actually just go through this and get this done and be able to check that box off? Is that a matter of years or months or weeks or hours? And you don't have to answer right now, but
What do you
next
mean
time
by
we
this
talk.
exactly?
That bullet is,
About the trailhead
so I hear two
connections.
questions is what is the actual demand of following through with that strategy to evaluate potential trailhead connections and identify places to park and Empire? What is the bandwidth load of that? And what's your opinion on whether that should be included?
Well, I mean, I think that that was a strategy identified as something that that small group in the PPT came up with as a possible strategy. I don't think that the ROMP is ready to have that conversation yet. I don't think anybody's ready to have that conversation yet, in some ways because I don't think we even are ready to decide when and whether we could start legalizing OHVs on county roads or why we would want to do that or why we wouldn't want to do that. It's a little bit to your point is I don't think we have clear goals. I think that's, one of the other things at least on the summarized PowerPoint was the idea of aligning vision for OHVs. And I think that's a missing piece here. That's why I think these conversations tend to take an hour and a half because we don't have clear alignment on what we're doing with OHVs and why. And do we want to cut them off? And what is the consequence if we don't, if we don't do anything with them and leave them as they are? What still needs to happen? Because something still would need to happen, right? We still would need to find a way to manage them better and address issues of safety and erosion and control, working better with the Forest Service. We're not ready to take any step.
And I'm sorry, because I asked her and then you characterized, I don't know if you're characterizing my proposal to take that bullet out as ignoring the issue. I'm talking about one of 7 bullets in the.
I mean, I think, sure, we should take it out. We should probably, I think that the best we can get out of the ROMP is identifying some principles for OHVs. And that we're far from ready.
I don't think we're far from ready. I think the problem is that they're,
Sorry, go ahead.
what?
I don't either. I'm agreeing with you.
I think that we can have a conversation about one thing, which is whether we see a future in legalizing it in order to expand the use and bring more people here to have longer routes and be able to therefore attract more OHV use to the county. And part of the problem that I started to say was that we have a complete turnover here. I've been through numerous conversations. I've been through conversations before being on BOCC, and we've had conversations since then. And then I've just kind of been stuck in this thing down at, over at NOCO and had these conversations a ton. And I've seen enough data and heard enough shift in attitudes among a lot of people at the Forest Service and even CPW off the record to tell me that I think I know enough to say that I'm not interested in a linear expansion of the use as an economic development tool or a recreational enhancement tool for this county. I do think we need to have a conversation about how we manage it and how we manage what's here so that we're not taking away from people what they're legally able to do now. But manage it in a way that maintains that cap. I think there's some conversation to be had in the future. I'm not interested in connecting trailheads, OHV trailheads with county roads to expand the recreational opportunities for OHVs in this county. And I'm just want to be clearly on record right now saying that I'm happy to strike that particular bullet point off the list because I've seen enough data and I've had enough conversations about it. And to me, it feels like Groundhog Day when we say we're not ready to have this conversation. It's like, I already thought we already had it 5 times. And then I remember everybody wasn't there for it, But so that's my input into this conversation about that bullet point.
We don't have the money to fund the trail extensions anyway.
I mean, there's other people's money. So.
That's not real money, is it?
And an alternative proposal is rather than strike that, if we want to evaluate trailhead connections, can we separate the bullet about evaluating trailhead connections and identifying places to park and reframe identifying places to park as opportunities to formalize parking in or near national forest land rather than like the thing that I know is a non-starter for me and is not therefore worth time building a document to inform me on is identifying places to park in and around Empire. I just know that I am not going to support that. I would observe that that's what the information I have now, and there could be information that would change that. I highly suspect that information exists. And I know it's not within this process to go and find that information. And so I think it's a waste of time. But as an alternative, if that's, I mean, what I don't want to do is, and Randy, I see that you're not happy with that proposal.
Well, if it's so obvious,
It's still going to the same place, then we're going to go ahead and evaluate trailhead connections and building of trailheads and.
We do not have to do that.
Why not do it to take it off the table?
Yeah, well, we can just take it off
We're
the.
talking about a bullet that is a synopsis of a comment made in a meeting. So it's not even about striking the bullet. It's about hearing the direction that we're hearing today, which is don't bring us a document that's going to extend trails on with respect to OHV use. That's what we're hearing loud and clear. I don't think the bullet needs to be struck because the comment was made in the meeting. that it's already said and done. I mean, it's
dated,
very
some
clear.
Input is valid and we
But
heard
at
it.
least two of you do not want to see that in this document moving forward. And again, all that is a synopsis of a meeting. It's not a recommendation. It's not a comment that we should do this. It's just a comment that one or two people made in the meeting.
I mean,
Didn't even make it into the summary deck, right? Like,
what I'm trying to do is really, and I don't think we're gonna get there. Sean, thank you. Randy, thank you for indulging me, trying to see if we can get the consensus on this.
If the consensus goes back to the same place, then I know, I can feel the public reaction coming out of it already for one thing. And then my own personal reaction is the same, is that it's a non-starter for me to think about, to create those connections on those county roads through the town of Empire and then create parking opportunities to use the national forest up there. But I honestly, this isn't just a NIMBY knee-jerk reaction. It's something that the experience has caused me to take a step back and look at the entire county and think about how we approach all forms of recreation. And it's the same kind of idea as it's the genie out of the bottle, like was unleashed on Guanella Pass before people knew what they'd done, when they simply made it a nicer place for the hikers to park. And we have now 3 times as many hikers as we did before on that trail, and they don't know how to maintain the mountain anymore.
And it's not just an Empire conversation, right? This proposal exists on Saxon Mountain. This proposal exists on South Spring Gulch, right? To get the ATVs to be able to drive down into the towns.
Right.
And that said, the last thing that I have to say on this topic is that whether, and this is to a point that you're making that is a good point, whether this board establishes as policy, we're not interested in that, or we wait for a report to evaluate it and then this board establishes it as a policy, these proposals are not going away. We will be contending with these proposals for the rest of Clear Creek County's existence because of the existence of those roads. And so I don't think whether we evaluate it now, whether we make a determination now or we make a determination after this process evaluates it, we can make these proposals go away.
That was kind of my point when it feels like Groundhog Day, is that I know that if we make this policy decision, it'll be a bone of contention and a source of discussion in the future, and someone will bring it back to us again. A former county commission voted for it and then voted against it when they saw this rabid outcry from the public, from the immediate public. And we have the ability to continue that policy of non-expansion and non-legalization or not. And just last year or 2 years ago, we lobbied for a state measure to make sure that it stuck and people didn't have them, and we eliminated the Montana loophole. That came out of Clear Creek County through CI and into the legislature, and we improved the law, state laws in Colorado, to eliminate an unintended loophole that people were using to thwart the law and try to beat it in court. And so we've set a precedent of turning it down once officially, and now we've set a precedent of lobbying the state to strengthen our ability to do that. And so are we still in that philosophical vein or not? Because we can say no, we can go through a study and we can put it down. And I guarantee you, Covco and some people are still going to come back and ask again later and present us data that shows us why it's good for us. And somebody just has to say no again in the future. Or yes. And I'm a no at this point.
I find that as a curious argument. I mean, basically you could apply that to any decision we make. Like at some point in the future, somebody may disagree with that, right?
Yeah.
I'll grant you that, right? I don't think that's a reason why we wouldn't want to go on record and express our preference as a policy board, because I view that as one of the most important, maybe the most important outcome of the romp, is figuring out what is the policy that we want to put in place to put us on the correct path for the future that strikes the right balances. And I think OHV is at the center of it. So to punt on that, to me, it doesn't seem correct.
I'm not suggesting punting. I'm suggesting that we actually reaffirm the decision that we're against that. And for me personally, having seen it firsthand, the results of when people thought it was legal, when it was temporarily legalized, and it took months to get those people to realize that it wasn't legal and to get them to stop. It's like you set the genie out of the bottle and it exploded, and it took months, and it took writing tickets and everything to get people reined back in and get them to stop doing it. So I've seen enough I've seen enough data to know that I'm happy to reaffirm that policy. I'm not, and I don't think that's an uninformed decision. It's saying I see enough to see, all the factors that caused me to feel that way before have only strengthened at this point in time because of the increased visitation and pressure.
You're making my argument, which is if the data is obvious and it's rampant and widespread, why not collect it, codify it, and put it in the report? Why steer around it?
If it's work that you need to do to make that decision, fine. I feel like I've seen enough work.
I think it's more not my decision. It's more, I mean, if we're saying that we're sitting here and taking in the input of all the stakeholders and coming up with a policy that strikes the right balance, why would we eliminate or steer around a major component of it?
So what you're basically saying is that you think if the report is silent on it, then we're not, we might be establishing our opinions in this meeting, but if it's not written into that report, then we're missing an opportunity.
Exactly. Like future boards are going to look back at that and say, well, that this board went on record and that's what they stated. It was part of this process that we went through. And now that you have to negotiate away from that instead of, because right now we're staying silent on it. Again, I just find it's convenient. It's easy. Those are the two things that are in its favor.
That's, you know what, to me, that's a compelling argument. I think, if we're moving forward with that as a strategy to evaluate, I would like to, really have the opportunity, whether it's one-on-one or on this board, to really provide the data and arguments that I think I have to this. And then the report can state the outcome, and Sean makes a good point. So I'm okay with that. I do, as far as evaluating parking, I don't want us to miss the opportunity to evaluate the creation of formal parking not inside of towns, like near the forest, right? In or near the forest, where I do think it's much more appropriate. It would be a missed opportunity to not evaluate that, and I don't really hear it in here. I hear instead that it should be in the towns or around the towns. And I'm fine with that. I don't know, Randy, how do you feel? Because
I look back to Guanella Pass because I want to make sure that I'm not personalizing this too much. And I want to say that I want to make sure that whatever we do, I'll tell you the way, part of this report has to be not only hard scientific data that we get from some really smart people that aren't here, but it has to also be the actual history, this conversation to date, the efforts to do something about it to date, and the observed lived experiences of the people who have lived through it, who have been exposed to it. And that's important. That's an important part that should inform our decision as well and be part of this. This can't be some raw data that somebody said, that somebody will give us economic benefits and so forth, and then look at the data of what's happened. The data that we have is when I collected those citizens who said that they were radically impacted, when they're calling me today telling me it's a problem. When I've gone up and found 20 vehicles socked into where most of them are trapped until people come down and start removing their vehicles 3 years ago, before we simply put some parking signs up and wrote some tickets. I had enough. That has to be part of this too. This has to help inform this decision. And because I brought these things up multiple times, but we need to go find some data somewhere that supports what's happening to us in our lives. It's kind of like if people are doing these things in our yards, in our streets, and people are cutting the corners and creating this additional damage that you can look at through various iterations of Google Earth and aerial photography. You can see the expansion going on. It's like, how much of that can we do without impacting wildlife? And someplace we have to act within our bandwidth and be willing to make a decision based on the things we know. Now, it could be that what has to happen is we need to write a document that underpins this decision, and it includes those things too. It includes all that anecdotal, the history to date of county commissions trying it and what the observed observation was. Do we have data about how many people went up there? No, of course not. But we have my observations and those of my neighbors of what we saw happen when we opened it for just a second and closed it a week later, 2 weeks later.
Yeah. Okay.
It had never legally been opened, and yet we had a reaction that took months to get under control.
And just to be clear, I'm not arguing for OHVs.
I don't hear that.
I don't think you are either.
Yeah.
I'm not. And I believe in data and understanding things, which is part of something I want to talk about in a minute if we can get to it. But
Okay, thanks.
The other thing that I intended to bring up, and I know I mentioned it lightly, but I'm curious to hear what the board thinks. This bullet point about evaluating non-alpine, not a bullet point, this project, one of the 10 projects, and what does it say? Evaluate winter visitation on alpine activities. I really, when I read through the document, I don't see the words Guanilla Pass. I see a focus on Loveland, Herman Gulch, other
Echo
areas.
Lake, yeah, Echo Lake.
We have right now, we have trail management resources going to those other areas. I think it's a missed economic opportunity. I think the place to focus winter visitation, non-alpine activity development is Guanilla Pass.
I agree.
Because we have parking lots that are built that are already on the maintenance schedule for road and bridge and we need to fill them up. And that means developing and communicating recreation opportunities.
You're talking about snowshoeing, like
Yeah.
specifically, what are you talking?
Cross-country
I'm
skiing.
talking about, the kinds of activities that you already see in use up there at a low level, right? That are low ecological impact, high economic benefit because people drive to cars that don't have drive to them in cars that don't have trailers attached, meaning they can park conveniently. And they're right at the entrance. They have to drive through
Sixth Street.
the most problematic district that we have. The most problematic downtown commercial area that we have is right here in Georgetown, where it is literally a ghost town in the winter. And so I would like for this board, if we agree, to ask that particular bullet focus on this particular area.
I agree with that. And the special reason is because it focuses on exactly what we've been saying about our tourism and tourism advertising and everything else, which is let's focus our activities on drawing people on where we draw them to low environmental impact, yet high potential economic gain areas. And downtown Georgetown, because it's off the beaten track, you've got to go right through downtown Georgetown to go up that way and head up the pass and go do that. So it's an excellent opportunity. Now, I think the two things that people to collaborate with, just to confirm, and we need to confirm, first of all, through our ecological data and through the Forest Service and stuff, that environmental impact really is low. And I presume that it is too. That's my assumption, And then the second thing is, work with the town of Georgetown and make sure everybody's in agreement on what we're doing. But I'd be hard pressed to imagine Georgetown would have a problem with that.
And what I'm suggesting, and if the report has compelling reasons not to do this, what I'm suggesting is that we take the trails crew resources that are currently being used in Herman Gulch and on the Bakerville Trail to work on those trails that are already popular trails and move them to Guanilla Pass and making Guanilla Pass a higher use winter recreation area. Is that what we need? Do we need to expand the capacity of the trails crew to be able to cover that? And how would we accomplish that? Those are the kinds of questions I have in mind around that. So other than that, I think these 10 identified priorities are all really important. I would refer you to Randy and I spent a couple hours talking through them in a lot of detail. I would refer you to those comments about what the board's thoughts are on them and maybe encourage you, Sean, to if you want to watch that or go through them carefully and provide your own feedback. There's a lot of important questions and opportunities in each one of these that we didn't get to today.
Mm-hmm. You hear a lot of stuff you heard today, though. I want to make sure we exhaust this subject, and then I just want to take a few minutes to talk about the CNA, the potential grant from GOCO to CNHP to ecological data, and just take a few minutes and tell you the current landscape. What else do we want to do on this board today?
I just completed my two overarching things that I wanted to seek board direction on. It sounds like we're not going to bite on this project that I've been trying to get us to undertake.
Which is that?
Which is, us building a evaluation and prioritization of use types. Maybe we don't have to get through that. Maybe we already are sort of there.
I like the idea it may turn out to be simpler than we think if we did it because of this. You listen to this conversation, you go, I don't think it's going to take us very long to get to conclusions, you know? I mean, I do want it to be data and information driven. So it might be something that we would want to take on at a later date. First of all, I think it might want to come after the romp because the romp's going to help inform that discussion a good deal.
Okay, maybe we do it after the romp.
Maybe it's an early next year thing and I'd like to get it done during my last year. I think it's a valuable exercise to try to prioritize that stuff. It also might give us the opportunity to get the ecological data that we need to fill in the holes in our ecological data, which are not completely non-existent, but are in large part non-existent right now. And if we are able to fill in some of those holes with CNHP data, it's going to get us to a really informed place ecologically too.
Okay. I just noticed, Julie, I noticed before that you were back, and now I see that your hand is up. I hope it hasn't been up too long.
No, actually, where you just landed on that discussion of use type actually was where I was going to offer that first priority of the, well, I forget what order you have them in, but the first priority that the PPT dug into was kind of that idea that as a next step, take a look at kind of system-wide, you know, what's happening with trails and uses and evaluate them based on more on natural resources data, you know, like the kind of data you're talking about, Randy. And there's different kind of principles the group has come up with, but I think, but the romp was kind of teeing it up to kind of suggest that that would be a next step to really dive into that. And that could fit into what you're talking about around evaluation of use type. Also related to that is evaluation of use difficulty, things like that, because that's something that's come up in the research and data as well. Is it, you know, is it that you want mountain biking but family friendly, or is it that you want, you know, or you don't want mountain biking or you want the harder trails? So there's a lot to unpack there, and that I think we're trying to say could be a next kind of deeper dive beyond the romp itself.
That's kind of what I was thinking. That's what I suggest. I think these continued discussions on the romp will help inform that and make it a more intelligent discussion next year.
I have this pattern of trying to get the cart before the horse, so thank you all.
Oh, no, it's a great suggestion and it was a perfect segue for Julie and ultimately for me in just a minute whenever we're ready to go there.
And I think a scoring rubric or whatever you want to call it, like I said, I'd be shocked if we're the first persons to ever decide we need something like that. Even if it's in a slightly different context, it seems like we should be able to find a track to run on.
Chafee and Gunnison may even have some stuff that they've done on their work down there. You know, we might
Reasons
find
why
out.
not to do it.
What I have seen, I've looked for this kind of information a lot, and what I have seen is that these issues tend to be kind of radioactive and very opinion based, and it's hard for collaborative processes to really identify clear outcomes that are precise along these lines. Because there's so many industries to try to keep happy and user groups to try to keep happy and constituencies to try to keep happy. And that's kind of why, I mean, my intent really is to kind of rip off the Band-Aid, take what we know, do what we can, bring what we think we know here and say, here's this board's opinion on something that is to date a matter of opinion.
Yeah, plus it's, even if you do kind of try to codify it and make it numeric, my joke is like, I can make a spreadsheet admit to anything if I torture it enough.
Right. What I'm asking for is basically like a robust and systematic opinion. I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want something to absolutely prove what I believe. That's all. I didn't say already believe, but that was supposed to be implied. Do we have any more on the romp before I just add this one piece that's kind of dovetails onto it?
No, I don't. I mean, I think there's plenty here and I appreciate your input. I think it may be useful to try to parse the conversation and play it back to you in a document or something. I don't know.
Yeah, we can talk. I mean,
Because I feel like there was a lot of material here and there was some direction. And I think in the interest of time, it might be useful to say, here's what I think.
Here's what I thought I heard.
Here's what I thought I heard. And is this, are these the marching orders here? Is this, should we proceed
like this. And I'm not going to attempt to do that right now, but I think that might be the way forward here.
I think so. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think we can operate with you one-on-one and then have another meeting back here when we
Yeah.
need to, when we see fit.
I would also say there's a whole bunch of other topics in that document that we didn't even touch on, right? We touched on public involvement and OHV use today. That's about it. And there's a whole bunch of other topics in there, so.
Winter visitation.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I hope that's reflected to say that the stuff we're not talking about is the stuff that appears to be on the right track. And that's the vast majority of this document. I hope that's the way we interpret this.
And I think there's one other thing we talked about today, which is understanding that we're actually not just saying we care a lot about Bambi and nature and stuff like that, but that we're actually getting information so that the actions that we choose take into account hard data about what we know in this county. So that was another piece. That was one of my overarching pieces that on the ecological side, both ecological and economic side, I think we've kind of made some generalizations and assumptions without really saying what that means and how we find that data and how we use it. So,
Gotcha.
that said, I think if we can identify areas that help our economy the most and hurt our ecology the least, that's kind of the feeling,
I like it.
those activities in those places.
Okay.
Drive us the least crazy.
Toward that end, as another next step, like creating the rubric that George is talking about, I want to share a screen for just a second here. Okay, see that guy right there? That is a map of everywhere the Colorado Natural Heritage Program out of CSU, Dave Anderson, who is the lead on the CNHP project, which has been around for at least 30 years now, where they have done studies and data for ecological studies. White are places where they've done no studies. So as you'll see, and I misspoke the other day when I said that that we were the only county other than Rio Blanco and Montezuma. There's also Custer County, which is the area down around West Cliff and Silver Cliff, between the Sangre de Cristo and the Wet Mountains right before you get to the plains. The Wet Mountains is kind of like a giant hogback that separates that plain down there, that park around West Cliff from the eastern plains. So as you can see, all the other counties, with the exception of us four, and you almost can't count Rio Blanco, and although I'm sure they have sensitive ecology there too, Rio Blanco and Montezuma, everybody else has had some level of work done. The brown are comprehensive reports, the blue are wetland reports, the green are upland and wildlife reports. And so you see when you even get down into Jeffco and in Denver, they've done some of this work even throughout Denver looking for sensitive species. We've had nothing done. There are other sources of data that are currently available to us, and I've seen overlays of these different maps, but the result of the CNHP data being missing,
CNHP stands for?
Colorado Natural Heritage Program. And so the results of that being missing are that when you look at an overlay of all the sensitive ecological areas, you'll see all of this area that you see in CNHP ends up looking kind of like it does here, except it's different intensities of blue. And there's only one area throughout the entire NOCO region that shows up with a whole lot of white in it, as though there's no ecological sensitivity of any kind, and that's in Clear Creek. And so having this data will infill that and allow us what that did was it told us when we looked at those maps and then I looked at this map, I suddenly realized what we were missing. So you've heard me bring this up a couple of times before in updates that I've been talking with Dave Anderson from CNHP. He's putting together a proposal. He's going to work on the proposal next week based on a conversation that he had last week with GOCO. And the person he talked to, who was a couple of people at GOCO, one of them was a zoologist and then some primary person in their grants, said that they would be very excited to infill the gaps in data around the state where they really need it. And so they really want to update some places. They want to do studies where they haven't done studies before, where they're critically needed. And Dave said that he was going to put Clear Creek Gilpin down because Gilpin wants to redo their wetlands and maybe they may upgrade to a comprehensive. I suggest we do a comprehensive, which is up everything, get the whole enchilada done. he gave us an estimate to do that for Clear Creek and Gilpin, about $200,000 to $250,000 total cost, about, I don't know, a few months ago, several months ago, I think. And he said that GOCO is looking at wanting to give grants to up around $300,000. They'd rather be up around $300,000 where they are. So, and they're also allowing overhead in the grant now and some other technicalities, which means that we fall into their range or reasonably close to it. And I let him know way back in the beginning, I said, look, Clear Creek's going to be really strapped to come up with any funds for this as a match. So, I mean, if Clear Creek's portion is $100,000 and we had a 25% match or something, maybe 25 grand, and I socialized that number here a couple times before, would be probably a max that we could get to, or in that range. So in his talks with GOCO, they said that at GOCO, for the GOCO grant, they are no longer requiring a 25% match, and that 25 grand from Clear Creek would be, they thought would fit well within their program to come up with, maybe $250,000 to $300,000 worth of work all total between Clear Creek and Gilpin. So Gilpin's making a decision about that too. Sandy was saying I saw an email from her today that said that in response to because Dave had emailed her too, that Gilpin's looking into it and they would like to upgrade their study too. And so they're going to look and try to get on the horn. The grant application is due on July 20th. They need to see a synopsis, an early summary, and a first draft by early July. And so what I'd like to do is by the June 6th meeting, I'm just looking for a thumbs up today. For the guy to just, do the estimate and probably have that ready for us. At our June 6th meeting, what I'd like to do is have an action item, if we agree, and putting it on the agenda to even do it, an action item to approve Rebecca moving forward at that time, or I'll just say staff moving forward at that time, to work with Dave Anderson at CNHP, create the grant, with the knowledge that it's likely to generate about a $25,000 match requirement, somewhere in that range. We may not have the estimate back in time to be, I'm sure we won't have it back in time to be in our packet for the 6th, because that deadline is, this Friday, I think, normally, and he's not even going to do the estimate.
Monday. But
So it'll come in later. So we may have a number that we can show you by meeting day, but it won't be in the packet in time. Most likely it'll be added to a late edition of the packet, if anything. But it would basically be moving forward with the concept that, we want to, all we're doing is approving, letting Rebecca work on a grant. That grant would come back to us at a later date, and just probably in early July, asking permission, getting our final approval to submit the grant, which we normally do anyway. Is that correct?
Partially, almost all.
Okay.
We don't bring you all grants for approval. I have the authority to approve grants.
Okay.
So what would be seeking on the 6th would be both direction to work on the grant, but also direction that you're going to approve the $25,000 match. I certainly wouldn't want Rebecca to go to work and write a grant and then not have the board approve the match. Therefore she wasn't approving the match, right? So we'd be seeking direction to work on the grant, and that you're agreeing that with respect to identifying the $25,000 match, which is going to have to come from fund balance, come from ARPA. Obviously, it's unbudgeted, so.
My only question, I'm still unclear on what the utility of having this information is and what costs we paid by not having it. So you don't have to answer that right now, but that's what I'm wondering about.
There's an email that I sent to Brian that I don't think you forwarded because it was long and complicated and had links to information and an explanation about what the program is and what they provide at CNHP. And then there are a couple of examples I included in that, links also to examples of final reports that they did for Summit County and Jefferson County to show you what the reports look like. And to me, the value is having ecological data to understand what our sensitive wildlife is, so that when we make decisions, and they can be regarding land acquisition for open space, they might be decisions about for good cause. They could be about They might impact development decisions in the future that impact the ecology. And they might also be decisions like the ones we're talking about today on recreation, about where we can and where we should and shouldn't put any increases in recreation or focus it based on its impact on, and what should we be avoiding? Because it's sensitive ground that if we build trails through that area, all we're doing is further cutting up wildlife, trail fragmentation. So, you know, I've heard many times that we should look at the places around us that have already gotten into this. Summit County, Jefferson County had their first study done in 1993. They had it updated in 2010 and 11. And Summit County's was done in 1997. So those folks are 30 years ahead of us right now in collecting data to be able to inform those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, my question specifically, I'm very familiar with Hinsdale County, Mineral County, San Juan County. Those counties don't have any money. So I'd be kind of curious to know how they were able to accomplish it and what they paid for it.
I've been asking CNHP that question because I want to know how we're going to get it funded.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the question I'm getting is almost all of them were brought in and requested by the counties themselves. In some cases, I'm sure there were other organizations. And I don't know what their costs were, and I don't know when they had them done. I haven't looked over the whole state. What I'm presenting here is the facts about who's had the work done and who hasn't. And just explaining what it brings to the table for us from my observations, looking at other maps at NOCO that are trying to advise what you do where. And there's a big void where Clear Creek County is because we don't have the data.
Yeah, I mean, kind of where I'm hinting at is I wonder if $300,000 is the only path available to us, because I know those counties have around 1,000 persons or less each. And so even a $25,000 match, I think for them is probably a hill too steep to climb. So, but I appreciate the work. And I just would be curious to know what are the full range of our options to solve this problem.
I believe that Jeffco and Boulder paid for theirs. I asked those questions, and in Jeffco's case, they simply paid outright, went without a grant. Boulder and Hammer, I don't recall, I think one of them also did the same thing. And again, Dave from CNHP said most of them were done by request from the counties wanting to get involved and do this stuff. And so to me, this is evidence that we're kind of behind the times and showing the interest in doing it. When I asked Dave, how did Clear Creek get left out? He said, well, we've never heard any interest from Clear Creek County in wanting to have this done.
I mean, Sean, you asked a good question, and I think it's worth seeing if we can reach out maybe through staff or Randy. That's because I don't want to give you homework. Just to hear like how some of these Hinsdale, San Juan, how that work was paid for and performed down there. To me, it's a question, just trying to answer the question of, do we even have to spend 25,000, or can we figure out a different way? That is not going to really inform a decision or an opinion about whether we should do it. I view $25,000 to get $300,000 worth of work as a great deal on a much needed data set. And so, you know, I'll be prepared to move forward regardless, but exploring whether there are avenues. I mean, I don't know, we might find something out like they used this partner organization and we didn't know, so we haven't spoken to them yet, and maybe that partner organization wants to help with our match or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
asking.
If we want to express to them that we don't even want to pay $25,000 to get our $150,000 worth of work done, then we can make that argument and let them know we're looking for a way to not pay that $25,000. And so
let me be really clear, because that's not what I'm suggesting.
I know you are.
What I'm suggesting is that we reach out to those counties that got this work done and ask them how they did it.
I understand that. And what I'm going to tell you is I've reached out to CNHP, who is the sole source of this data out of Colorado State University and has obviously been robustly used. And I've asked them to work the best deal they can and find us. And so they've come back with this opportunity to do a $25,000 match. Now, that said, if we can find, because sometimes you can use one fund and one grant to match another fund. So if there's another source out there, that's fine. I've kind of exhausted a bunch of time into this right now, bringing this and talking to them several times. And so if somebody wants to, if we'd like our staff to call Hinsdale County and ask them how they got it done, that's fine.
That's what I'm suggesting. And I actually think it would be a mistake to do what you characterized the suggestion as,
Yeah.
which is reach out to CNHP and say, we don't even want to pay the $25,000.
No, I didn't say that. I'm saying that's what we can call these other folks and say, hey, how'd you get it done? Because we assume that you probably got it done with lesser resources.
Yeah.
And some of it may have to do with when it was done and all that other stuff. I don't know the dates. I haven't gone over and clicked on every county on the map and seen and opened all of their reports to see what dates they were done on. I gave you the dates of the ones I did check on, which were our neighbors, based on advice I've received many times in this room.
Thank you for the clarification, because what I thought I heard you say was, if we want to reach out to CNHP and tell them we don't want to pay the $25,000. And so that's what I wanted to clarify. I don't want to.
Yeah, me neither.
Whomever we reach out to, we're going to say, we have an opportunity to get this done with a $25,000 match. We're trying to find out if there's a way to avoid that match, and that's the truth.
Or we could say, hey, you
Well,
got
that's
this done. You're low resource. We're low resource too. How'd you get it done? Which partners did you
Yeah.
use? Which funding sources?
And I also look at
We
Eagle,
don't have to characterize ourselves in poor light while we do it.
Eagle and Picken County did not get the comprehensive, which I'm assuming is the most expensive one. And they probably did that for a reason. So
Well,
it
maybe
kind of
they
makes
had-
me wonder why, if our geography is similar to theirs, maybe we don't need the comprehensive one either.
Well, I see a bunch of brown ones around us whose geographies are also similar. Maybe they had wetlands reports from some other source already. I don't know.
Maybe.
Haven't called them.
Yeah. So, I mean, but I think those are good questions. And again, I don't want to create homework for you. I acknowledge
Yeah.
you've done a lot of work on this. I appreciate that work. I'm not pointing out any failures of you. I'm just suggesting some additional questions.
I'm not worried
And-
about that. My only frustration is making sure that we meet a deadline and actually have a chance to go for something that's a good deal.
Yeah, so
Happy to make those calls.
Lake County is actually, sorry to interrupt, Lake County is a good one too, because they did the comprehensive. They have a budget that's rather strained as well.
But you-
And they have-
Happy to make those calls, but if you take a look at those dates on there, it's been 17, 18, 19 years since these studies were done. So the likelihood there's even going to be staff that remember how it was paid for.
Yeah.
Right, so.
It's a phone call, right?
That's a great point. Lake is more recent, to Sean's point. So the other thing that I think is related to this that I want to mention is, ARPA is the potential source of funding for this. We may be approaching a calendar year since our last conversation about ARPA funding priorities. I think it's incumbent on us to have that conversation again and just get an update. What did we authorize? How was it? What was spent? What's left? What are the options? Does the board wish to issue further direction on those options? I know that involves like a lot of different pieces, right? Like I've been talking about seed money for housing authority, and I don't know if we have a budget for the housing authority to really inform that line item. But if we can, whatever we can get us on that same date around kind of an update on ARPA funding, I think that would be really helpful.
Same date?
If we're talking about authorizing ARPA funding for this grant, then we should be talking about ARPA funding on the same day.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we gave you a brief update during the retreat. It showed you how much money we had left. It showed you where the money had gone. We'll dust that off and get you something like that.
You're right. You did give us a brief update. And we can have that conversation again. I just want that information
Sure.
to be
Yeah, we'll have
with
that.
me while I make that decision.
And you mentioned the retreat. We need to schedule a retreat part 2.
Peter and I are meeting with Caroline tomorrow. Today, actually, this afternoon.
Oh, yeah, the
Conversation
budget retreat.
About
Right.
our reviews. So they can
Exactly.
kind of, yeah. All right, so I'm here, we're bringing an agenda item, June 6th. Action item related to directing staff to apply for this grant.
And as much information on ARPA as you can bring,
Yep.
and as much information as you can get by calling the other counties and finding out how they got it done and how they may have avoided costs.
Yeah, Beth, did you find something?
I did. On the Hinsdale one, it says, and this is from like 2005. The CNHP received funding from CDNR, Colorado Department of Natural Resources, through a grant from the US EPA Region 8 to survey for critical wetlands in Hinsdale County. With additional funding from the US Forest Service, the BLM, the Colorado Division of Wildlife, CNHP performed wetland surveys in Hinsdale County for 2 field seasons of 2006 and 2007. So there was multiple partners that funded their study there over 2 years.
Well, it's possible that $25,000 could come from, the watershed, or, we could talk to the Forest Service and see if they have any more funds to pitch in towards the 25,000 to get it done. I know that GOCO is good for about a $300,000 grant with matches that are less than 25%. And the initial indication they gave us was that $25,000 for a match would be sufficient. Now, if we find partners to match in the 25,000, I'm fine with it. I just remind everybody that on the 6th, we have to make a decision about whether we're going to put time towards creating the grant so that it can be submitted by the 1st of July. And I'd like to leave a month in there because I know Rebecca and I'm sure Dave Anderson, who heads up the whole CNHP program, he wants to personally put our proposal together, and then he'd be working on the grant too. And so I just want to make sure that, so I was trying to leave the rest of the month of June to kind of act as bandwidth to get that grant application together and have it be, and they did tell us that they thought we had a really good chance with GOCO and that CNHP themselves would support it as their number one ask.
When's the next go round if we can't make this deadline?
I don't know, probably next year, but I don't know that.
I mean, I
Kind of like to get the data too.
my take is, you socialize this well with the board. I know every time you brought it up, I've said, it sounds like something we need to do. And I think this is the year for us to move forward, and I don't think $25 is too much. I think it's worth making some phone calls to see.
I do too. I agree with Sean.
But
on that.
I don't intend to have a conversation that delays this application.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys being real nice to me, and the tension in me is just, I'm just trying to get it done. That's all. And we've got it in our crosshairs now. It looks like we can actually make it happen. And what really, I won't say terrified me, but really raised my eyebrows at NOCO was when I looked at the map of ecological sensitivity throughout the state, and the only place anywhere around the NOCO region that showed an area of absolute white was a bunch of Clear Creek County. And I went, there's something wrong with that data. And some of it's in the wilderness area and all over. And I said, there's something wrong with this picture.
And
What's missing? How did we fall through the cracks, And
at this point, my understanding is that we're kind of holding up the NOCO process because we don't have this data.
Everybody's moving forward with what they can do without it. It's just, I've just said we can't move forward with really recommendations from NOCO that could help inform our ROMP or anything else without having the proper data behind those recommendations. So we can participate with the data we do have, but in terms of generalized recommendations for Clear Creek County that we'd even be interested in entertaining, we can't really do that until we've got enough data to show we're on a level playing field with the other counties in the region because of that whack-a-mole theory and what they like to do with like moving stuff where it looks like it won't create as much. What it does is it gives other counties the argument that they have ecological sensitivity that needs protected, and over here we don't. And now NOCO doesn't have the unilateral power to force anybody to do anything, nor does the Forest Service over the counties. But when we're trying to have a collaborative conversation, that conversation is better informed by having us all on a level playing field. And that's something I fought for at NOCO for 5 years is we're just, in that realm, we're as big as the Forest Service at that table. Everybody's got the same vote and the same opportunity.
To Beth's point, if it took Hinsdale years to accomplish this, it might take us some time to accomplish it as well.
All the more reason to get started now.
Yeah, so thanks for the efforts. Again, I'm just sort of
Thank you.
trying to figure out a way that we don't even have to spend the 25,000 and get what we need.
That's your job.
Passing that along to Sean, and I don't know where I think Sean's signatures.
What's with the blue
Oh,
paper?
right there. I was like, wait a minute. It just
Left hand doesn't know what the right hand is put over here.
Slow on delivery.
Who
Did
would
we
buy blue
finish what we needed to finish?
I think Beth had to physically cut this to give us paper.
Okay, no updates for, that includes any new information from Brian,
I hate signing things that are going to be given to somebody.
conversation about
I wear that blue pen.
I have this one.
Yeah. Almost offered it.
specific legal advice, determine positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations on.
Or again, Sean.
I could bring.
I too have a terrible signature.
I think that would be helpful. If there's a brief that hasn't been made, I think for us to hear it.
So we have a 12:30 first at the animal shelter.
I was just suggesting that we didn't hit our entire executive session, specifically
Coastal.
the
Gonna be brief.
Okay,
negotiations, et cetera, on the Jeffcom conversation. County dispatch.
you got time for executive session, Sean?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I move we go into executive session for the following purpose.
As previously stated on the record, CRS 2024 B and D for the county attorney to meet with the Board of County Commissioners for the purposes of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions pertaining to county dispatch communication services and determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators with regard to county dispatch communication services.
We have a second here?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And no written minutes will be kept and no decisions will be made. We have concluded our executive session. No written minutes were kept. No decisions were made, and we are adjourning to resume at 12:30 at Charlie's Place, the animal shelter, to meet with the Board of County Commissioners from Gilpin County. And from there, we will move to the health clinic in Idaho Springs. And with that, we're adjourned till 12:30 at the animal shelter.